today. So, thank you, Businessworld. Thank you, Anurag and friends. At the end of the day, it's a great challenge for listeners to be present. It's also a challenge for presenters to make their case. But I'm very glad that we still have some people with us. I'm very grateful to my friend Rakesh, who's taken the trouble of coming here. Thank you, Rakesh ji. So friends, this is actually the story of the maps of India. This is a story of how we have evolved. Can I have the presentation, please? So what we'll do is, we've got about 19 minutes and 36 seconds for my presentation, and I think 10 minutes for a conversation. So you see, friends, why do we say States of Bharat? We say States of Bharat because British India had provinces. And when the country became independent in 1947, we had 9 provinces and 562 princely states in our country. What we see today is that from 1947 to 2019, when Jammu Kashmir was reorganized as the Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh, the map of India has changed about 80 times. When I say the map of India has changed 80 times, it means that the Survey of India has published a new map 80 times, because every time the name of a state changes or the territorial jurisdiction of a state changes, or the status changes from a union territory to a state, or when a state becomes a union territory, or when 2 union territories merge, the Survey of India has to come up with a new map. And so what I've done, again during the COVID years, was to go to the Survey of India, which is an organization, a knowledge organization based out of Dehradun, and I collected all the maps of India from 1947 to 2019, and I put them on the walls of my library, and I started looking at how maps have been changing year after year, year after year after year. So obviously we don't have the time to go through 80 maps, but I'll talk about some maps which I think have had a deeper impact on the history of our country. So friends, as you see here today, this is the map of India in 1947, and you see that you have the provinces of India, which is areas directly under the British rule, and then you have the yellow areas, which are the princely states. And these princely states vary in shape and size. You have Hyderabad and Jammu Kashmir and Mysore, which are 21 gun salute states. And then you have very small states. You have states which are so small that they do not even have the ability to manage their own affairs. But what happened in 1947 was that, except for these 3 very large states of Jammu Kashmir, Mysore and Hyderabad, all the other states were either merged along with a neighboring state, or they were made into a union of states, as in the case of Pipsu, or some other formation happened so that they lost their independent existence. Now, I must share with you, before we go any further, that the most controversial states in the imagination of a country were Jammu Kashmir, Hyderabad. These were 2 states which had a very interesting scenario. Jammu Kashmir, where the majority population was Muslim and the ruler was a Hindu, and you had Hyderabad, where the ruler was the Nizam of Hyderabad and the majority population was Hindu. But I must tell you that a lot of people, and these 2 states are also very closely linked to the conception of India and Pakistan. You see, contrary to what a lot of people think, Mr. Jinnah hated 2 people the most. The 2 people that he hated the most in the country were not Nehru and Patel or Mahatma Gandhi. The 2 people that he hated the most were the Nizam of Hyderabad and Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah from Jammu and Kashmir, because these were the only 2 people who could challenge his position as the sole spokesman for the Indian Muslims. And interestingly, Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah was a fairly secular person at that point of time, because he was, apart from being a very popular leader of Jammu Kashmir, was also propped up by the Indian National Congress as the head of the All India States People's Congress from the Tripuri session of 1956, which was chaired by none else than Subhash Chandra Bose. And he hated the Nizam of Hyderabad, because the Nizam of Hyderabad was a person who could have mobilized, who did mobilize a lot of Muslim opinion around him. And in fact, the Nizam of Hyderabad was the only His Highness in the country who was called His Exalted Highness, as against the others who were called His Highnesses. There were two reasons for this. One was that he made a big contribution to the British kitty, but apart from that, he was the person who issued a firman which allowed the Muslim soldiers to fight in the First World War against the Khalifa. So that was a major requirement for the British state to have done that. Okay, we'll move on. We now move on to the second map of India, which is 1950 map. Can we move on, please? Now, in the second map of India, you see, the masthead here says, India, states under the new constitution. That is why the title of my book is, We the People of the States of Bharat. Now, it's very important, as was discussed in the morning also, that India is one country where it is India that is Bharat. Now, I also must tell you that the Britishers never wanted us to have the name India or Bharat. In the British scheme of things, they wanted India to be called Hindustan, and they wanted Pakistan to be called Pakistan, because if that was the scenario, then British India would have had left two successor states, that is the state of Hindustan and the state of Pakistan. But Patel, and more than Patel, Mr. Menon, who was a bureaucrat like me, I mean, of course, more distinguished than me, he realized that if we were to choose the name Hindustan, then we'll have to renegotiate all our treaties. And therefore, he decided that we shall call ourselves India and not Hindustan. That's the important thing. But by this time, you find that, India is looking more recognizable. Most of these princely states have been merged into the neighboring state, and this is how India starts beginning to emerge. And notice that you find Tibet mentioned at the top. Also notice that there is no reference to China on this map. Let's move on. The third map of India, next map please. The third map of India is also the first Hindi map of India. And the significant part of this map is that the word China appears on top. Now remember that the Britishers never brought in China on the map of India. They always used the word Tibet, right? So in their imagination, because a map not only tells you about yourself, a map also tells you about how we look at the neighborhood, how we look at the world around us. Therefore, for the first time, Cheen, the word Cheen makes an appearance on the map of India, and this is also the first time that you have a Hindi map which is published in the country. Now, when this Hindi map was published, it was celebrated in the north, but it led to a lot of frustration in the south, because at that point of time, there was a fairly strong anti-Hindi movement which was happening in the south. And immediately after this map was published, we had a hunger strike, not because of this map, but there was a general hunger strike in which Potti Sriramalu died, and that was the beginning of Andhra state. Andhra has had actually 4 states. You've had Andhra, you've had Hyderabad, you've got Andhra Pradesh, and we've had Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So, because what had happened was that immediately after the country had become independent, the whole aspect of linguistic states took a little backseat because of partition and because of, the number of violent deaths that had taken place both in Punjab and in Bengal. So it had been placed on the back burner. But Potti Sriramalu said that, look, you had promised a separate state for Telugus, why don't you give it to us? And this was also aggravated. The first water dispute in the country took place when C. Rajagopalachari wanted to shift the flow of the Krishna River. The first capital dispute also took place because one of the reasons why the division between Andhra and Telangana and Tamil Nadu or Madras could not take place was because both wanted the city of Madras, which is named after a Tamil goddess called Chennai. Anyway, to cut a long story short, when Potti Sriramalu died, then Andhra state was created, and along with that, the state's reorganization commission was set into motion so that the entire country could be, so that people could give them memoranda and all these things. And remember that the States Reorganization Commission received 1.5 lakh memoranda throughout the country. Everybody wanted a new state. Every region in this country wanted a space for itself. And having a separate state for an ethnic or a linguistic community was actually an article of faith which the Congress had accepted way back in 1910. When I talk about the Congress, I'm not talking about the Congress as it exists today. I'm talking about the Congress as a national movement. And remember also that the Congress as a national movement had dual membership. I mean, the Akali Dal was a part of the Congress, the Hindu Mahasabha was a part of the Congress, the Muslim League was a part of the Congress. So Congress is not a Congress was actually a national movement, because any leader that you think of, all the leaders who later on had great ideological disputes among themselves, all of them cut their teeth in the Indian National Congress. So the Congress had, from 1918, agreed that there will be a Sindh Congress, there will be an Utkal Congress, there will be a Kannada Congress, there will be a Tamil Congress. So it was an article of faith for the Congress party. And let's also remember that although the four great leaders in this country, all having very different conceptions of India, Mahatma Gandhi, a different concept, Hind Swaraj, everything should be done in the villages, Nehru, Patel, Dr. Ambedkar, all of them had very different views on how India has to be governed, but all of them were agreed that India cannot be run on the administrative lines in which the British had created. Every state must have its own language, must have its own ethnicity. And that's very important, because if nations which do not respect this break up, you've had the example of USSR, you have the example of Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, closer home, again, Bombay is, of course, Mr. Jinnah's city, but Mr. Jinnah went to Dhaka University, and on 21st February 1948, he gave a speech in English, and he said that Urdu will be the sole official language of Pakistan, which is what led to, which was actually the beginning of Bangladesh there, You do not imagine any democratic leader doing this. I mean, can you imagine, any Indian leader trying to speak in English at a place without so anyway, that's a long story apart. But anyway, this is how. So let's move on, because we'll have to be much quicker. Okay, let's move on, sir. Next slide, please. Okay. Now this is the next map of India, by which time you see the southern states have started coming into being. I can't really read what year it is talking about, but you gradually find that the maps are beginning to take shape. Let's move on further, because we are really short on time. Okay, let's move on. Can I have the next map, please? Now, I want you to see this map. This is the map of India in 1958. What I want to show you here is that Tibet has disappeared from the map of India. The significant part here is that Tibet has moved away from the mind space of India. So it is not only a map which tells you about how the four southern states have come up, it is also a map which shows us that in our imagination of the world around us, we completely ignore Tibet. Now, when you completely ignore Tibet, this is acceptance of, in fact, today, if you have to argue back and claim a lot of the territories that you're talking about, this is the map that will be shown to us, and we'll be told that, look, this is a Government of India map. This is a map in which you've shown all this area as China and not Tibet. And all our agreements, whether it is our agreement vis-a-vis a sky chain, whether it's our agreement on the McMahon line, all of them are based on the assumption that Tibet is an independent entity which could have entered into an agreement with us. Right? So, what I'm talking not is about whether it is or it is not. I'm only talking about how historically we lost a certain case by not having Tibet on our map, because when you are in a state of negotiation, the other party is going to bring up everything. The other party is going to bring up everything which will go against my line of argument. Anyway, let's move on, because I have a lot of stories to tell you. But what I'll tell you now is that in 1960, because in 1956, when the states were reorganized, the States Reorganization Commission did not agree to reorganize three large states, and these were Bombay, in which a lot of representations had been made that, Marathas and Gujaratis, both of them wanted out from Bombay, and both of them wanted to have linguistic states. Second was Punjab, where there was a very strong Punjabi Suba agitation. And the third was Assam, where a lot of smaller states, Nagaland, Meghalaya, Mizoram, all of them were wanting for statehood, right? And this was not accepted in 1956, because till BSF came into existence on 1st December 1965, the defense of India's borders, the first line of defense was with the state armed police. So the argument that was raised by the SRC was that unless you have strong states which have the financial clout and the administrative capacity to manage their borders, it will be very difficult. So that is why it did not happen. But in 1960, when Bombay, when Maharashtra and Gujarat were made into separate states. Then in 1963, Nagaland was created. Now, Nagaland is a very small state, very 3 lakh population. Why is it important? Nagaland's creation is important because when Nagaland was created, the principle that a state may not be administratively viable, may not be financially stable, but in order to ensure that if any part of the country agrees, just tell him to go out. I mean, it's slightly disturbing, this mobile phone. If any part of the country is willing, if any group in the country is willing to accept the territorial boundary of India, then we will go ahead with this thing. But the making of Nagaland had in it the making of Meghalaya and the making of Arunachal and the making of Mizoram. I'll have to cut the story very quickly, but I want to bring you to Sikkim. Sikkim is important because the Article 3 of the Indian Constitution also says that the territory of India had been defined. So India cannot cede any territory, but India cannot also accept any territory. Now, the story of Sikkim is very important because this is the only part which has been integrated or which has been brought into India after our independence. And the reason for that is, the background to this is that, Sikkim was actually a Lepcha kingdom, then it became a Bhotia kingdom. But in 1870s, the Nepali workers were asked to come and cultivate the lands around the monasteries. By 1947, the population of Nepalis had grown in Sikkim, so that by 1947, Nepalis were 60% of the population of Sikkim. So Sikkim became a part of India because the majority population of Sikkim wanted to be a part of India. You cannot have any part joining you unless the majority wants to be with you, right? By which time also some things have happened, that the earlier resistance to smaller states, that has been given up. And all political parties, when they started their assumption, it was that we must avail, the BJP and the Jan Sangh were totally opposed to smaller states. But by 2000, a general consensus was that as long as any ethnic group, any linguistic group, any regional group is willing to be a part of the overall system of India, we will accept it. That's how, without much agitation and without much ado, you had the states of Uttarakhand, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh come up. Then 2014, you had Telangana, which came up, and that is a new principle. That new principle is that a state other than a Hindi-speaking state can also, a language other than Hindi can also have two separate states. And the last change, of course, is when you go to the last map, please. The last stage in the whole process is 2019, when we had the reorganization of Jammu Kashmir. And you have the last map, please. The reorganization of the country into Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh. Now, the thing to note here is that in 1948 itself, Ladakh had been wanting to move out of Kashmir, and they wanted to be a part of the Lahaul-Spiti area of Himachal Pradesh, and moving on to Teri Garhwal and Pauri Garhwal, so that there could have been a large ethnic Buddhist kind of a space that could have been the northern border to Tibet. But of course, it did not happen at that time, and now it's finally happened. So friends, what I want to share with you is that maps, the internal boundaries of a country, if they change along with the aspirations of the people, then the nation becomes strong. It becomes better. Because power actually lies when people are aligned with their geographic entities and with what they want to claim. I will now close. I know my time is up, but Ruhail will give me 1 minute from his time. So I will just read to you the important conclusions of my book, because you see, a book is written, it's written with a lot of effort. Not many copies are sold. Even if they are sold, the likelihood of their being read is again not very high. Therefore, it is better to give the key points, so that even if you don't read, even if you buy the book and don't read it, there's something that we can take home. First is that the notion of identity is fluid. Identity is not cast in stone, but it's not gas either. Identity shifts every few years. We evolve. Second, language usually unites, but language, if the script is at variance, as in the case of Punjab and Sindh, can also be a great divide. Third, the way national political parties think is often very different from the way regional parties look at things. And when we take the case of Bombay and Maharashtra, it's very clear that when Maharashtra was created at that time, neither the Congress, nor the Jana Sangha, nor the Communist Party of India, which incidentally was a very strong party in its heydays in 1960s, none of these three parties wanted a separate Maharashtra. But the Samyukt Maharashtra movement came up and it demolished whatever the national parties wanted. Fourth, the national parties, the regional parties have very different perspectives on most issues. Fifth, the English language press, the Hindi press, and the regional press also have their own ways of looking at things, and these things could vary. The local workers of a party will not accept the central leadership if it is going against the immediate needs and requirements of the people. And every story has multiple perspectives. And last, that while 6 to 7 decades is a long time in the life of an individual, in the life of a nation, we count it in centuries. But for civilizations, we have to look at millennia. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.